Hi, and welcome to this week's Wu Wei Wisdom, a life lessons teaching. It's great to be back with you all. You'll notice if you're watching us on YouTube that we are not in our normal studio because David and I are traveling for the next few weeks, but you'll still get the same great value teachings from us. So this week we are talking all about the labels we give ourselves. Now, do you call yourself a worrier, an anxious person, an angry person, or even a highly sensitive person? Now, you may believe these kind of labels are helpful in describing yourself, but actually they can be very harmful. They restrict who you are and they restrict your future potential. So in this teaching, we're going to be exploring this in a lot more detail and looking at why we create these labels and how they can impact our life. So David, how common is it for a new client to come to you and basically label themselves in this way?
This is a really important question, Alex, because it's very common. And why it can really restrict you, because giving yourself that label gives you kind of the lens that you look through the world and your problems in. So as you said in your introduction, if you label yourself as a worrier, then you see everything from that worrying perception. So it's very important. I dislike labeling at all. I don't think we should label at all. Perhaps, and then somebody could write in and say, yes, but you call yourself a spiritual person. I guess I do. And I think that's probably the best label to use. I remember somebody once said to me, are you a human being having a spiritual experience? Or are you a spiritual being having a human experience? I think I'm the second. Would that be a label? I don't know, but I would want to look at something from a healthy, positive label rather than a negative one.
I mean, I guess, David, that, if someone's labeling themselves an anxious person or a worrier or an angry person, that's kind of different from maybe using a label where they've been given a diagnosis, like yes. A medical, or is it not? Is it kind of a blurred line for some people to say?
I think it's a blurred line. I'd agree with you, but I think it can be a blurred line on some cases because the doctor, the GP, the consultant will very quickly want to give you a label. And it's very easy for that person to adopt that label and then act in that way. They kind of very quickly, because it gives them a justification. Oh, I can't do that because I'm not very good at this. A lot of children are given a label of something like dyslexic. I was given that label. And so then they see themselves as dyslexic, and it becomes, in our model, we call a self-fulfilling prophecy. You then start to convince yourself you can't do things because you've got this label inside of you. This label has been given to you. And I think it's very important to look at the label and to see whether you believe it to be true. Do you want to own this label? Do you want to be accountable? And then this comes down to one of the fundamental teachings about accountability in the Wu Wei Wisdom model. Do you want to be accountable? Do you accept it fully that you are this label of a person? I'm a highly sensitive person. Do you want to be that highly sensitive person? I'm a dyslexic person. Do you want to be that person? I certainly do not want to be that person. So I would reject that label.
So I guess as well, David, it's also about, because some labels, medical labels, for example, can be helpful for us to do some research, understand why things may be a certain way. But what you're saying is that beyond that, don't let those labels restrict you. Don't think you, for a lot of people, can't change from being a worrier, an angry person, overly sensitive person. And also, I think I guess more of a spiritual teaching is it's not the wholeness of who you are. You
Yes,
know,
that's what I was
even a
going to say.
medical diagnosis is not the wholeness of who you are as a person.
I think that's what I was going to say, Alex. You're getting to the root of the problem now, is when somebody gives you a label or you give yourself a label based on experiences, really look at that label and critique it, take it apart. Are you just using that as something as a justification, for instance? Are you like using it as an excuse? So it's very easy to drop into that way of thinking, and then those ideas become your identity. And then that moves on to your point. We are not just one thing. Please, this is such an important Taoist teaching, to label yourself as a worrier, as an anxious person, as a fearful person, as an angry person. You are kind of restricting yourself. You are bringing yourself into a really tight box, when actually that may be one characteristic. But as you said, you're forgetting all of the other characteristics of who you are. That's what I said at the beginning. Well, think about your spirituality. When there's a doctor has ever given you the label that you're a spiritual person, I don't think they would ever give you that label. And these labels are very restrictive for you. And I want you to kind of break those chains and break those shackles and look at it more as a holistic, the Taoists call it the oneness of who you are.
And really, this teaching, I know we've obviously mentioned at the outset this idea of medical diagnosis, but this teaching is principally about when we label ourselves as a certain type of person, so a certain type of emotional person, in the absence of a medical diagnosis. So when we say, if I say, "Oh, I'm just an anxious person. I can't do this, or I always react in this way because I'm just an anxious person, or I'm just an angry person." This is when saying we are this type of person, I guess it becomes a default. It becomes this story that you're talking about. And this story becomes very restrictive.
And the story becomes our identity. And you're absolutely right. This teaching is about what we tell ourselves. But as I said earlier, it's also about what other people tell us, particularly when we're children. So this teaching will definitely involve the work of the inner child. Because if one or both of your parents would say to you, "Oh, you're not very good at that," or "You're not as good as your brother," or you're not very good at math or English or science, or "You're not very good at doing this," that they're giving you a label. And when you're a child, it's very easy, because they're the authority figures in your life. It's very easy just to accept that without question. And so the teaching is question. And I say in every video, what do you believe? Most important now, why do you believe it? And the why is what we call in our model the golden thread. Find out why you believe you're an angry, anxious, whatever person. Where did that diagnosis come from? And that's the key to changing it.
Yeah, because I can imagine, a lot of parents labeling their children as, "Oh, he or she is a very sensitive child or a very withdrawn child." And that narrative of who we are begins then. But we take it on and we believe it, as you say, without questioning it. But we never, as adults, think to push beyond it, to think, well, what would happen if I dropped this label? What would this open up for me? What would this allow me to do? Because we use these labels almost like as a comfort blanket and a protection.
Yes, and they become very familiar, and they become a safe place. Lots of my clients will use, "Well, it's a safe place. It's the known." I just spoke to a client just a few days ago talking about the known to the unknown. And this is what she said: "I know it's wrong, but I know it. And what you're offering me, David, is like going down the road of the unknown. I don't know what's going to go down that road. So and your wording was absolutely right. Even though it's not right, it does become kind of a comfort blanket. But this is what you've got to break through, because this comfort blanket is a straitjacket. It's restricting you. You're living constantly telling yourself that you can't do this because you're angry, because you're hypersensitive, because you can be overwhelmed. And that's why the story goes that if you're told this as a child, or if you develop this, that becomes a story. And then most importantly, the story then slowly over your teenage years and early adult becomes your identity. Now you start to believe it. This is the problem, but there's something inside of you, and this is why you have to look at the bigger picture, as you said, Alex. There's something inside of you knows that this is not true, knows that this is not all you are, knows that you can reach a higher protection and potential. And that's what I call Shen, your value and your worth. Because here again, we go down to the fundamentals of Wu Wei teaching. When you restrict yourself, what you're actually doing is separating yourself from your innate, inherent value and worth. You're saying, I'm lesser than, I'm not as good as them. And sometimes this is where it comes from, because a parent will compare you to a sibling, compare you to somebody else at school. And so the child part of our mind then says, the vow, VOW, there's something wrong with me. There's something missing in as with me. That restricts you. Then you slap on the labels, and then you're now walking down your path. You are now restricted your path, and you've cut out that Shen side of you, the spirituality side of you.
But I think, as you said, we may adopt these labels from childhood, or they may evolve from childhood. We then we hear it from our parents and maybe our teachers and other family members, and then we start to say it to ourselves, quietly inside ourselves, and then we start to verbalize it, to speak it out as adults, as teenagers. Oh, I'm just a worrier. I can't help myself. I'm just an angry person. This is the way I always react. Or I'm just such an overly sensitive person. And we do it without question. But those words, either as the self-talk or verbalized, are so very, very powerful. We don't realize it's almost like a bit of a dangerous game we're playing with our own identity.
You're absolutely right, Alex. It's Russian roulette. You've got a gun to your head and you're constantly telling yourself these negative affirmations. And slowly over time, you come to believe them. And then what happens, and this happens to a lot of my clients, it's what I call cherry picking. You then look at experiences in your life to confirm the negative. You forget all the good things, all the positive things, all the wonderful things that have happened to you. You discount those almost like flicking your fingers, and you concentrate on all of the negative things, which confirms your label. You're saying, I can't cope. It's the three lies. Here are the three main labels. I'm not good enough. I can't cope. I'm unlovable and I'm unworthy. I would say the majority of my clients have what I call those three lies. But those three lies are the label. Just take the first one I said, Alex. I'm not good enough. Now, if you've got that label going on in your head 1,000,000 times a day, confirming this to you, and this is what clients, when they start to realize how much this self-talk repeats during your day, then you start to look at experiences, what people say, what you do to reinforce your core belief. And so it becomes what we call in our model the carousel of despair. You're stuck on the carousel, and then that goes back to what we said. That carousel of despair becomes familiar. Even though it's not working, it's familiar. But all the time, while you're listening to these teachings, there's a little voice that I call Shen knows this isn't right. But this bigger voice is so powerful and is so familiar and is so comfortable, even though you know it's working. And what we try and do on these teachings is to connect you back to Shen, because that's how you get off the carousel.
So the bigger voice that gives us these labels. So if we believe we're unlovable, if we believe we're not good enough, that's kind of the manifestation of that is the label. You know, I'm a useless person, I'm a weak person, I'm a worrier, I'm an angry person, all the variants on the theme. But that voice that you talk about, the bigger voice that keeps shouting this out, that's our ego, or the inner child part of our mind. Yes. So if the Shen, this wise, knowing part of us who knows that's not the truth, who knows that we're much more than that, why is it that the inner child always wins out, that we carry on with using this label, even though that wise part of us knows it's unhelpful and harmful?
Yes, exactly. And that's why I prefer to call it the inner child, because if you have got physical children of your own or been around as any children, you know that when they don't get what they want, they kick up a fuss, what I call the squealing piglets, temper tantrums, shouting loud, and they're trying to get their own way. And this is why it's so challenging to change, because every time you give in to the inner child, and that's why I prefer the label. So again, we're labeling the inner child to the ego. I think that's a more helpful label, because every time you give in to that loud negative voice saying you're not good enough, and you don't challenge, saying you can't cope, you're vulnerable, and you don't challenge, saying that you're unlovable or you're unworthy or you don't deserve it. And listen, if you've ever heard yourself saying any of those three lies, you're on the carousel. You're on the carousel. How do you get off the carousel? You start speaking the truth. That's what breaks the connection. You start being honest, because the pathway, as you said, I'm not just answering your question, the humble Shen is very quiet. So you have to go to Shen, where the inner child will come and dominate you like a child does. You have to go and find Shen. And the path to Shen is truth, honesty, and integrity. And that's why you have to challenge those ideas.
So what you're saying is we need to start questioning our self-talk. We need to start questioning the ways in which we label ourselves or the names we call ourselves. We need to stop almost saying, oh, I just don't even realize I'm doing it. It's in my subconscious mind. We need to bring it into our conscious awareness and question it and really interrogate it.
100% correct. So I don't know I'm doing it. It's down deep inside. It's a habit. Here's what I hear. It's natural. I can't stop it. I can't control it. It's more powerful than me. See, all of those statements are the inner child statements to make you the victim. You are the victim of the inner child. The inner child has become hierarchically more powerful than you. And I use the example, and it seems as though it hit a chord with most people. It's like you're driving your car, and instead of you being in the driving seat and with your hands on the steering wheel, you've got a little 8-year-old running your life, driving your car, and you're allowing them to do it because it's easier. This is what I hear from my clients. When I say, why do you do it? They go, well, it's easier. I say, but it can't be easier, because you wouldn't come and find me out. If it was easier, it's just more familiar. And you want to change, but you don't want you to change. You want everybody else to change.
Yeah, I mean, David, I think if some of us are brutally honest with ourselves, there is a payoff to using these labels sometimes. So again, I'm just talking about the emotional, personal labels we give ourselves now. In particular, I'm not talking about medical diagnosis in this instance. But if I say I'm a worrier, or I'm just a very sensitive person, I'm just an angry person, it kind of gives me a get out of jail card to avoid tricky situations, to not take responsibility sometimes when I ought to be taking responsibility, to pass the book to someone else, to expect them to solve the problem or deal with the pressure, not me.
That's the key. See, I say to my clients, and I think every client will always resist and push back on this, there's a benefit. And they go, there can't be a benefit. There is a benefit. And you just hit the nail on the head, because the inner child wants like a magical fairy godmother to come floating in, sort out the problems, put a nice pink bow on it and give it to them all sorted out, and they can carry on in their life. And you hit the nail on the head. It's about accountability, self-responsibility, and using these emotional labels, if they're not used correctly, and this is what we've said, because I use a label, but make sure that the label is used correctly, and you can challenge it, and you can do the golden thread, because that really is what the golden thread is about, Alex. It's about reverse engineering. Asking yourself, why do I believe this? Why do I want to continue to believing this? And then I normally get the answer, well, how do I stop? Put your hands up how many times you've said that to yourself. Well, how do I stop? And you say, no. Why do you want to do it? See, putting the accountability back onto you. We call it the flip. You flip it back. Don't ask me to tell you to stop. I'm asking you, why are you doing it?
I think if we do that interrogation work that you've talked about, this questioning why do I label myself? What's the benefit? What's the payoff? It's almost like if we do it correctly and honestly with ourselves, because no one's judging us as part of this exercise, it's almost like we reach, and I know you're going to stop me here, but it's almost like we reach a precipice of like, oh, hold on a minute. I can see now that I perceived there was a benefit in using the label, but I can see it's also restricting me. But the problem is, if I drop the label, all of a sudden, I've got to start facing up to things. Yes. I've got to start taking full self-responsibility. And hold on a minute. I've kind of been using this label as an excuse for like decades now. And it feels a bit scary to drop the label.
So I was like waiting for you. I was waiting for you to go to the feeling. Yeah. And that's what the inner child does. Just as you said, when I'm going to use your words, when you went to the precipice and you didn't like the idea of being accountable, then you see what the inner child does. Brings in the feelings. It feels scary. But remember, you are the creator of feelings. So you create fear. And so that's how the inner child controls you. I was just waiting for you to take yourself to the precipice, and then the inner child uses the feeling word. I'm scared. I'm fearful. I don't know the unknown. I don't know how. And now you're talking about the inner child wants to be future-proofed, wants to be certain, wants to be in control. This is all the work we've done on the inner child. We've got so much in the archives. But this is when you have to say, I feel. So when you're doing the golden thread work, as Alex just demonstrated, and goes down to the precipice, remember the rule. Do not use I feel. Ban the F word. How many times have you heard me say this? Ban the F word. I think, I choose, I believe. I think, I choose, I believe, because that puts the accountability back onto you to be responsible. Why don't you want to go there? What is it that you don't want to do? And the inner child will tell you, well, it's uncomfortable. I don't like it. I've never been there. It's the unknown road. I don't want to go down the unknown road. It's almost like you offer the inner child, you're sitting on a fork. The known that doesn't work, or the unknown that could work, the inner child will always take the known that doesn't work, because it's got the story, it's got the identity. As you said, it's built it up so it can blame other people. Well, it wasn't me, it's the way they look at me. Oh, this always happens to me. Why do I always attract the wrong man? Why do I always do this? Poor old me. Why? And that story is so strong that highly intelligent people, and it's so, I don't know what the word is, it creeps in so slowly over the years. You don't wake up one morning and think this. It's a very slow process over the years until you start to believe your own story, and that becomes your identity. And so the golden thread is extremely powerful at getting and sorting this out.
And so, David, I guess the other thing to say is really there is no precipice. It's
no precipice.
Your inner child catastrophizing, because really it's a straight choice. You can, I guess, face a situation which is challenging or unfamiliar, but you don't have to default and say, oh, I can't deal with this because I'm just an anxious person. This is going to be too much for me. Just don't label yourself in that way. Acknowledge the fact that the unfamiliarity, the difficulty, may be generating red light feelings within you, and then start to question the thoughts and the beliefs behind those feelings. That's the golden thread process. There's no need whatsoever to just label yourself and then back straight off, because you're avoiding the life lesson.
That's right. And the life lesson is that you are not just the inner child. So the inner child is an extremely important and valuable part of who you are. It's your subconscious mind. We should learn to love the inner child. We should learn to be able to understand its language that it uses, and we should be able to resolve the unresolved issues. But really, there's a deeper lesson here, and it's getting through the barrier of the inner child screaming and shouting and having squealing piglets and temper tantrums, and touching your sacred shen, who you are, your spirituality, your innate value and worth. And all of the work that we do is to say, learn the life lesson. We never say, ignore the inner child. I've never said that. I say the opposite. Embrace the inner child. Let's talk to the inner child. When I'm working with a client, if I can, I love to talk to the inner child. And you don't see a monster. You don't see some kind of a demon or a devil. I see a 6-7-year-old child trapped, absolutely trapped, because no one has ever gone to them, given them a hug, and saying, sweetheart, you are amazing. I love you. Now, let's sit down and let's go through the questions, the unresolved issues. Let's teach you how to deal and address the reality of life. Let's show you how to not use emotions to keep yourself trapped on this carousel of despair. Let's introduce you to your Shen. And because that really is the basis of this work. We're not, as you just described, we shouldn't have this internal tug of war between the inner child and what we should really flourish and be on our journey. It should be a oneness where the inner child is part of the team, very valuable. The inner child has got some great qualities. The number one quality I get from the inner child is determination. The inner child will stick, they'll hang on like grim death. But the problem is they've been hanging on to the wrong things. Our job is to get them aligned onto the flow. That's what the Tao means. Wu Wei, be in your flow. To introduce them, to say, you've got a little brother here called Shen, a little sister, and you can work together. We're a family. Let's bring everything together into a oneness. And that's the life lesson, to learn to navigate through the emotions, through the false identity, through the stories, through the poor teachings, the dysfunctional family, and to see that no one can touch that innate spirit that you are. It will always be there. And what we're trying to help you do is to connect to it so you become that spiritual oneness.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. And I will put a link in the show notes to our inner child teaching playlist. And there's plenty of teachings on there to help you do the inner child work, the inner child reparenting that David has just talked about. And I'll also put a link to our Shen teaching playlist. And there is, again, lots more teachings on there explaining about this wise Shen part of who you are, and also a beautiful Shen guided meditation. I really, really hope you have enjoyed this teaching. Please do comment and let us know if you've enjoyed it. David works one-to-one with clients all over the world every week via Zoom video call, and I will put a link in the show notes to learn more about David's sessions. And finally, if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, please do check us out. Every week, we're producing new videos and also twice weekly shorts with little snippets of wisdom for you. We look forward to seeing you again very soon. Bye-bye.